for joining us today on Coastal and Progressive Rainbow Forum on Society Bites Radio. Today, we will be speaking with David COYLE, and who has a very interesting background. He's part of our series, Diversity and Inclusion and Human Interest. He helped found several companies in his 25-plus years in San Francisco, one which continues is HIV/AIDS Healthcare, founder of the AIDS and ARC Day Care Activities Program, ADCAP in the abbreviation, in 1987. It continues today, but under a different name, Continuum HIV Day Services. David, you have an incredible career behind you, starting in technology and your undergraduate work and IT. You were in the computer industry in the very earliest days with IBM, and let's start there and tell our listeners a little bit about your incredible background. And you ended up over in the Minnesota area then, finally.
Yes.
Welcome, David.
Thank you. Well, I started off with IBM, as you said, after college. I was a biology major, and I was walking up and down Wilshire Boulevard trying to find a job after college, and everybody wanted me to sell pharmaceuticals, and I was sure I didn't want to do that. So I saw the IBM building and said, well, they're a new company, big company. They hire a lot of people. I'll go over there and see what they've got. And I took a couple of tests and got hired as a systems engineer trainee. I was doing that for about 5 months, then I went into the Air Force. I was drafted, but just went to the Air Force instead as a communications officer stationed in Biloxi, Mississippi, and Mobile, Alabama. After that, I went back with IBM in Houston, and then I had a job opportunity up in Kansas City, so I left IBM, was in Kansas City for a couple of years, and then moved back to San Francisco, which was not far from where I'd gone to college. So I stayed there for about 25 years.
Excellent. So what, I know they had some tumultuous years there during the early days of the AIDS crisis in the United States. And what led up to your founding ADCAP there in San Francisco?
Okay, I had a friend who was diagnosed with, at that time, they didn't know quite what to call it. I don't even think it was called AIDS yet. But David Pascoe was that, and he was in the hospital, and he couldn't be let out because there was no place to let him out. He lived alone. So he was in the hospital, and he was refusing to drink because he would urinate on himself, and he didn't want to be an embarrassment. And I thought, isn't it awful that there is no place for people like this to go to get the kind of help they needed? At that time, there were an awful lot of other people, lovers, friends, family members, who were trying to figure out how they could hold down jobs to bring in money to support the people with AIDS, and at the same time, be able to make sure that they were safe. So I thought, well, wouldn't a daycare program be something that would be useful? Have something that people could drop them off during the day, could take care of making sure that they got all their medications. There'd be a washer and a dryer to take care of any accidents or clothing problems that they had. We would have events and other kinds of things to make sure that they could be socialized, could be aware of what was going on. And these were all sorts of problems, because one of the things that often happened with people with AIDS was mental problems. There were fungal problems that would happen that would infect the people's brains, and they were not able to take care of themselves at all. So the idea was that they'd be able to be in this during the day. Their loved ones would come at the end of the day and take them home and continue with their care. That was the idea, and my idea was that we should do that pretty much on the cheap, so that was a model that might be able to be replicated around the country. We got together a board, and then I wound up leaving because the board decided that they didn't like that model. They wanted to go to the state for a large amount of money to do it. It took them quite a while, but they eventually did set up a program of that kind.
Okay, and so when you were in the San Francisco Bay Area there and living there, I'm sure you've got, if you can just think here for a minute, I don't want to put you on the spot, but think of some of the stories you could tell about what was going on, what life was like there in that period of time? Because I know there was so many things going on there. It was, of course, San Francisco is considered the LGBTQ capital of the country, just about, and I'm sure you've got a lot of memories from that era there.
Well, it was much like things are now. People were afraid to go out to be around other people. Nobody knew exactly how infectious HIV was, how you got it, how you kept from getting it, and everybody was quite afraid. I had a business partner there, Barry Hockeman, that I started a computer consulting company with, and he wound up being diagnosed with it, and he died. In between, we put together some systems for the first, well, what were at that time were first called the Gay Games, so systems to register participants and other things for what was, well, at that time they were calling it the Gay Olympics, but the Olympics said, no, you can't use that name, so they wound up being called the Gay Games. So that's one of the things that's very strong in my memory. Another thing I remember, there was a gay newspaper in San Francisco called the BAR, which is the Bay Area Reporter. It was started by a bunch of people in the bar business. And I remember one headline. It says, "No deaths," a great, huge, gigantic headline across the entire weekly paper. What that meant was that there were no deaths reported that week from AIDS. Now, that was particularly interesting because up until that time, there had been many times that there'd be 4 and 5 pages full of obituaries.
Wow.
So that was a change in the thing. I also worked for an organization called the Shanti Project, which was to help people with AIDS and get people into their homes to help them clean with food and just be an ear to listen to people. Right. I don't know whatever happened to that, but that was a very busy time.
This is incredible information, and I hope some of our younger listeners that would hear this, see this as part of LGBTQ history that has not been widely reported, and it's fascinating.
I think it is well reported in San Francisco. I know there are gay archives at, I think it's University of California at San Francisco, or maybe used to be San Francisco State, the state college there in San Francisco, and they have a gay archives there. That I wouldn't be surprised that a lot of these things were collected, because the BAR had used to have lots of articles about it. There were lots of people and committees and other things formed, and I'm sure that there were minutes and other things that people kept with noting that information. But it was an effort, and I'd like to give a particular shout out to the lesbians there. They were the ones who really stepped up at the General Hospital and got the ward started for the AIDS people, and a lot of them were nurses and other things who did, well, like now, the first responders who are working 18 hours a day to try to keep people alive.
Yes.
It's not all that different in terms of the human toll of the epidemic.
Right. You know, a lot of people, of course, the since they have other medications and things available now, a lot of the younger generation of the LGBT, well, any community, okay, that's not because HIV is not just for the LGBT community, because that's where people used to think it started from. But
well, maybe I can give a little thing about, people think about it and they think, oh, it's just terrible. They don't know what the people before there were any treatments for it. They didn't know what used to happen. Often there was something called Kaposi's sarcoma. It was blotches that would appear on the skin. It used to be found only in ancient Jewish men, very close to death. And this is the people with AIDS would have this, and then there was nothing much could be done about that. There were fungal infections that happened in the brains, in the eyes. People would waste. They would not be able to maintain their weight, and they would get thinner and thinner, and then they would be skeletons when they died. Their hair, even if it were bright brown before, would lose all its color and become a washed out somewhere between brown and blonde, lose all its curl. it's just as though the life was being sucked out of every possible part of the people's lives. I mean, that's the way it was for those of us who were suffering through it and watching friends and loved ones go through that.
Unbelievable. Yeah, and I remember back some of the, we lost, a whole generation practically of people.
Yes.
That were in, it was a nightmare. And a lot of us, who survived, we survived for various reasons by sheer luck, and those years. It was pretty frightening. I wasn't in the United States when all that started, and I was gone. And I remember reading about it and coming back to the United States and hearing friends that, oh my God, and of course you become frightened. You think, oh my Lord, because this is the early days, before they really knew how the transmissions happened and everything too. And then later on, of course, you learned, and of course, medications.
But that still wasn't enough. A lot of people were still afraid. They didn't believe that it was transmitted through bodily fluids. They thought if you were in the same room, or if somebody were a teacher, that he could somehow infect the kids in the classroom.
Exactly.
So these are the same areas that Anita Bryant was passing her spleen around about how gay people were terrible and shouldn't be allowed to teach and shouldn't be allowed with anybody. And that's when she got hit in the face with a pie.
Yes, I
you can look that one up too. That's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, and in fact, I remember I was visiting the United States, and I participated. I was here on a very short visit, and just so happened there was a march going on against Anita Bryant, and I didn't even know who she was or anything at the time. And my friends were telling me, said, "You've got to come with us. We're marching," And I thought, "Yes, I'll be there." Okay, so I participated in that. And to show you what a small world it is, you mentioned and the gay games, and my God, this is so fascinating. And we had. Do you remember? Okay, there was a group, and it was large. Oh my God, they had called GAU, I believe it was, the Gay Athletic Union. And do you remember that?
Call it? No.
The Gay Athletic Union. Okay, I don't know what happened to them. But they were large, about the same time, and it was a federation across the United States of LGBT athletes, and it was we had a true story here, real quick, that you'll see how this interlinks. They were the sponsors behind a group of the gay men's softball or baseball team. Okay, and this was in Houston, Texas, and the mayor of Houston, Texas, at that time was Louis Welch. He went on TV. He was a really right-wing bigot, and he went on TV and mocked the gay players. And he said they were. This is when they were trying to build rapport against the police department. So the police department fielded their all-star team against the Gay Athletic Union's baseball team. I'm sorry. And anyway, so what happened? It was on the news and everything, and they put their all-stars together, and it was a big game. And my friends filmed this part of this and sent it to me, and they were telling the story about what happened then. So anyway, it was all hyped up and everything, and they had a mercy rule in there because the policemen thought they were going to just run over and destroy the gay athletes. So what happened by the fourth or fifth inning? It was the reverse. The gay players were up like 15 runs on the police, and they refused to come out of the locker room when they had their break or something like this. True story. And they had, and in the mocking, the Louis Welch had done, and he said, well, they'll have to leave their purses at home, and they cannot use the same locker rooms as our policemen use, because we don't want them. Yes, and then the reverse happened, of course, and everyone laughed about